Well, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today. It's so great to see so many smart, experienced people here as we pursue what some people think is a really complicated question, and maybe by the end of our conversation we'll nail this thing to the ground. So let's start with some introductions, and our goal today is to talk about producer agreements and artists and points and sound exchange and some stuff that some people are confused about, and we're going to try to bring some clarity. And so ask some friends here who have a lot of experience. Let's start with Stephen Leiweke. Why don't you tell us who you are? I know a lot of our students you've visited a lot of our classes over the years, but tell us who you are and what you do, and just a little brief introduction.
I'm Stephen Leiweke. I'm a record producer. I'm a songwriter. I'm an engineer. I mix records. I'm a session guitar player. I'm a musical guy who does the musics. So yeah, I have a studio in East Nashville. I do a lot of independent artist development and work with label people and people who needs the stuff. Yeah,
that's great. And so today you're sitting in the producer's chair, literally, like you're sitting in the chair. I've been in that room with you many times, and so you're our resident producer today.
All right,
Mike J. Introduce yourself. Tell us what you do.
Hey, Mike J. And I own Proper Management. We're an artist management firm. We're based down in Franklin, Tennessee. We've got a full roster of Christian artists, bands, solo artists, things like that. So,
and you've had your hand on some arrangements with producers, working with artists, and both with labels and independent, right?
Absolutely. And most of the artists that we work with are, they're signed to major labels, so we're not dealing with a lot of independent stuff, and we're certainly entering a space where that is a lot more plausible that we would do that. But most are with major labels that they've already secured their deals, and we're working with producers certainly as the artists are making their records and walking alongside them with the label, with A&R.
Right. Yep. Brown Bannister. Who are you?
Hey, I'm Brown Bannister. I'm an aspiring producer, and I guess more contextual for the application. I'm also, I guess I came into the School of Music at Lipscomb University 2 years after Charlie Peacock had started the program, and I've been here, I can't believe this is like 8 years, and I love it. And I'm also like the, I guess, VP, Senior Creative Director of this thing called Imagine House. And we're starting a record label. So we're dealing with artists, and we have producers, we have filmmakers. All this stuff is kind of bubbling up. Just questions about how, especially in the university context, how students should deal with each other on a business level. So this is a really timely discussion, and I really appreciate Mike and Vince and Stephen for jumping in on this.
Yeah, and I'm really impressed you found an angle somewhere in your empire that does not have Grammy Awards behind it. That's hard to do. That's really hard, or gold records. So, and with Stephen being somebody who has worked with signed artists and independent artists, and has his role, you kind of, Brown, came up sort of in the classic era of the record business, and so there you have a slightly different perspective on when you kind of cut your chops in that. So we got two producers in the house, as well as somebody who's kind of having to figure out what maybe Stephen's perspective is going to be a little different on how things are now and how he's produced. So I thought it was really valuable to have that.
Yeah.
Two people.
Yeah, that's great.
And then Vince, tell us about yourself, Vince. I know a lot of our students know your name because they've been reading your books. I make them read your stuff, but they haven't seen your face, maybe some of them. So tell us about yourself.
I appreciate that, John, and I appreciate it to the students. If any of them ever have any questions, they can email me or email you, and I'll be happy to give them some feedback. I've been involved in the faith-based music industry here in Nashville for over 45 years. I started working in sales and distribution, worked my way up into marketing, eventually went out on the road as an artist, wrote, recorded, promoted my own music, became back into the business side, working as vice president of sales and distribution at Provident Music Group. Left that after a while to start an artist management company, tour management company. We managed the Winter Jam Tour Spectacular that Mike and his company now have been doing for so many years. I ended up going to law school because I had all these experiences, especially as it related to negotiating contracts and trying to create win-win opportunities for artists, labels, publishers, management companies. And so for the last 12 years, I'm a practicing attorney. My specialty really is contract law. And as you mentioned, I've had the privilege of writing a couple books on music business and trying to kind of leave everything I've learned in the hands of the next generation, so they can build on what I've had the privilege of experiencing the last 45 years.
Awesome. And for those of you who don't know, I'm John Thompson, and I am the Director of Music Industry Studies at Lipscomb, among other things. And in addition to my role at Lipscomb as a professor, I've also been an independent artist for a long time, and I've done a little bit of production as well. So I can appreciate this from a few different perspectives. And as we get started here, what sort of precipitated this is that we've got students who are artists, and so they're working with producers, and we've got students who are producers and they're getting their degree. They want to go out and be producers. And we're in an era where most artists are going to be independent, maybe for their whole career, but certainly for a lot longer than maybe they were, say, when Brown was getting started, and you really needed a label to have a viable career. So the rules are changing, and they definitely have already changed. And the agreements that are in place, a lot of people are just doing stuff. They're just going out and, someone say, how much would it cost for you to produce a song for me? Well, it cost $1,000. Okay. I got 750. How's that sound? Okay, well, we can make it work. And then they'll just do a deal, and they'll go make a record, and then they'll put it out. And maybe there's not even a deal. Maybe there's not even a contract or an agreement or anything in place. They're just willy-nilly kind of doing stuff. And then sometimes it's fine. Sometimes it's not fine, because later in the last 4 months, I've had 5 or 6 students come to me with various questions. And sometimes it's really bad, and sometimes it's just kind of bad. Sometimes it's just kind of confusing. Everything from producers saying, well, now it's customary for producers to own 20% of every master that they produce and to participate in 20% of all of the revenue from that master. And I'm like,
what?
I do not think that is true. And then to the other side of producers thinking, all I'm ever going to get is the $750 or the $1,000 or whatever. And points are not relevant anymore. And I also think, I don't think that's true either. Like, I think that if you are a producer and you participate in the creative process and something does, maybe 1 out of 100 songs does become a hit, maybe there is a way for you to fairly participate in that. So what I want to talk about is, what are the critical elements that should be in an agreement between an artist and a producer, or maybe a label and a producer, if they're the ones that are in the driver's seat. Let's talk about that first, and then let's get into one of those things is going to involve points. So we'll talk about that next. But what are those things? Let's start with Vince. Like, what would you say as an attorney, if you were hired to craft an agreement? What are the key elements that should be in place on a basic contract between a producer and an artist?
Okay, well, actually, my first question to you would be, is this from the artist's standpoint? The artist comes to me and says, I have to have a deal with a producer, or the producer comes to me and says, I'm going to be working with some artist clients. I need an agreement. So who's my client here?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? Yeah, I think we got to start with that. So let's start first from the artist's perspective. So if the artist is working with a producer and they want to have the relationship captured on some sort of document, what would you say from the artist's perspective?
Right. Well, typically the party with the most power typically issues the contracts, at least in my experience. And so if you're a developing artist, a young artist, working with a producer, chances are that producer will have some kind of document they've been working off of. And so I would probably start with, it would be cheaper to start with that and just say, producer, do you have a standard agreement that you typically use in your relationship with the developing artist? I'd like to look at it, and I'd like to have my attorney review it, and then we can come to some agreement about what the compensation is going to be. So, that said, if you're a young artist, you can certainly identify the elements that are important to you and say, this is what I'm willing to, this is how I'm willing to compensate you. This is who's going to have the ownership rights, who's going to have the distribution rights. I mean, you could certainly bring that to the producer and say, this is what I'm looking for. Are you comfortable with that?
So what would, if there were 4 or 5 things or 3 things that need to be in an agreement for it to even be functional,
Right.
What would those things be?
A contract, by definition, has to have 3 elements. It has to have the subject matter. So you have to identify what the contract is about. It has to have the parties. So you have to clearly identify who the parties are. And then it has to have what the compensation or consideration is going to be between the 2 parties. And so, obviously, if it's a producer contract or an artist recording contract, that's pretty clear what that is. It's pretty clear who the parties are. Now we're looking at what the elements are with respect to compensation. So it can go anywhere, in any way from it being a work for hire contract, where the artist says to the producer, I want to hire you to do this. I'm going to continue to own all the elements, but I'm going to pay you a flat fee to do this. It could have some kind of incentive for the producer after the producer gets paid. If the record is distributed, some kind of royalty based on distribution income. Again, it's going to depend, and Mike can probably speak to this as well. It's going to depend whether the artist is a truly independent artist, where the artist is the label, or if the artist has negotiated a deal with a label. If the artist has a label deal, then typically the label is responsible for deciding what the artist royalty is going to be. And the artist royalty can either be computed on the income, a percentage of the retail price, or it can be some kind of income split. And we're seeing that rather than just paying 13 or 14% artist royalties, and out of that royalty, the producer royalty usually lives inside the artist royalty. Sometimes the artist gets paid a percentage of whatever the distribution company is able to generate in income after expenses have been deducted. And so if it's a label deal, then typically what the label is doing, not always, but typically the label is advancing the cost of production, often giving the producer a producer advance, again, which is recoupable against future royalties. And then they're responsible for all the accounting and quarterly disbursements of royalties. If you are the producer, your royalty is either going to be, like I said, if it's with a record deal, with a record label, it's typically going to be inside the artist royalty. So let's say the artist has a 13% royalty and the producer gets a 3% royalty. Then what the label prefers to do is for all that money, all 13% of the income that comes in, to be recoupable against the income, recoupable against the expenses that have been incurred in the production and often the promotion of the project. So in that situation, the producer typically has to wait until there's some recoupment in order for the producer to start making money after the production advance that the producer gets.
Right.
That's with a label deal. With an independent deal, it's actually a lot squirrelier because, are you as an independent art, as a producer, are you really going to rely upon that artist to give you a percentage of whatever comes in, to be able to account for it? So if you're the artist or the producer, you have to ask yourself, if I want a complicated deal with a producer where after a certain amount is recouped, there's some kind of percentage on top of that. The question is, how is that going to be administered? And there are companies that can do that, can help you with that. But typically, the independent artist, it's much more complicated to get those kind of royalty reports. So anyway, I don't know, John, if I
Yeah, let me just kind of summarize and make sure that I'm hearing this right, and then I want to go to Mike and see what his perspective as a manager is, and then I want to go to the producers and see how this is shaking out with them. So, key elements that need to be in there. Obviously, any contract has to have the subject matter and the parties that are agreeing to it, and then the compensation and consideration. So,
and by the way, contracts don't have to be in writing, but it
right.
is very advisable for them to be in writing, because any contract that can't be fully executed within a year
Right.
typically requires a writing to substantiate it, and you would want that to be the case. So,
Right.
and
in some cases, it's like if it's over a certain amount of dollars in certain states, there's some things or whatever.
yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah.
The other thing to think about too is in terms of and I can't think of. I forgot where I was going. Go back to what you were saying.
So those are the main elements which we can
Yeah.
talk about, like what makes an agreement
Yeah.
a binding agreement. But then when we get into this particular thing, we're talking about the nature of it. Is it work for hire? Who owns the assets that are created? So is
Right.
it whoever's paying for it generally is who considers to be owning it. So if it's a label that's paying for it, the label owns those masters. If it's the artist is the label, then you want to specify that the artist ends up owning it once they've paid for that. But maybe we put a little star there and say that if the artist is on a payment plan with the producer, maybe they're not paying everything up front. And there's some ways that people can work that out, and maybe the producer does retain some ownership, but that's kind of a side thing. That's not a forever thing. It's like a side deal. But we'll talk about that.
Unless you're a producer and you want to have a perpetual ownership in something.
But you have to at least acknowledge that. It's not implied. It's not something you want to just assume.
Oh, that's what
so you want to specify ownership of it is my point. Right?
Thank you for reminding me. If it is not included in the four corners of the contract, typically it's not enforceable. So while you don't have to have a written contract if it can be implemented within a year, typically these kind of things go beyond a year, which means it really does need to be in writing. You need to have an attorney look at it, and anything that you want to be enforced, your rights and your responsibilities must be in writing, because a court will not enforce something that is outside the four corners of the agreement.
So we've got the nature of the deal. Is it work for hire? Is it something other than that? Ownership of the assets once they're created. What is the fee going to be? And then underneath the fee, there's the back end. Are there royalties on top of that? And then how are those going to be calculated? And we're going to get to that in a second, because some of those royalties are going to be based on a percentage of the net receipts. That's what the labels have done in the past. It's a number of the points that are going towards the royalty. Like you said, they live within that royalty, what we call royalty load. So they're 3 of the 13, or maybe 5 of the 20, or whatever it is. But then also we're going to get to Sound Exchange in a minute, where there's a little bit of a carve out that's treated differently. Then we're going to figure out there's this thing. I want to go to Mike with this. So Vince just identified that there's the way this has kind of been done for 100 years or more, or something like that, where record labels would administer these things and deal with this. And then in the digital age, and there's more and more people doing it independently, because maybe people like Stephen Leiweke they don't expect that they're going to hear from most of these artists. And most artists don't have the capacity to administer what is 3% of their gross earnings, and are they going to go back and calculate all of this recoupment and all that kind of stuff. So they're just trying to figure out how to not do that. And so is that really fair? Like if Steven produces something that becomes a big, massive hit and he's not getting those 3 points, is that really fair to Steven, because he's not able to do that? Or he's just assuming that that's not going to happen. So we want to talk about that. But then labels also get to recoup. They get to recoup at least the cost of the production. And Vince just mentioned sometimes that they can roll in some promotion and marketing as well before the producers get those points. So Mike, based on what Vince just said, what would you say are kind of the critical elements if you are, as a manager, kind of working out a deal and saying this is the nature of this agreement for a producer? How are you going to articulate this stuff just sort of in bullet point form to make sure that we're covering all of our bases?
Got it. And I don't know if I'll be able to answer it really directly. Most of the artists we're working with are, they're signed artists. They're already in. The labels having these negotiations. The A&R is bringing in these producers. They're creating producer agreements with producers that they have a relationship with. I think for a lot of these artists, aspiring artists that are coming in and they're trying to figure out what the next step is, trying to create music. And I would think you'd want to really identify, okay, what's my end goal here? Like, I want to make music, and let's face it, they're creatives. Most of them aren't great with numbers. Some of them are, and some of them are really savvy business folks. But a lot of them, they're just very creative, and that's what they do. And so it's identifying, okay, well, what's the end goal here? I want to make music. I want to play shows. I want to do this, or I want to do this independently and own everything. Which is going to require them to, again, build their own team separately outside of that. Or, hey, I just want to get some music out there, and I want to get signed eventually to a label deal. I think it's one of those things to identify and also kind of figure out, don't sign, be careful what you sign, and be careful who you sign on with, because there's a lot of people in this town that would love to just take your money. And if they're the ones that are running around, making these promises, or I'm gonna get you signed here, pay me this fee, it might be something to think twice about. A lot of those can go south pretty quickly. But in a lot of ways, I'm looking at things of how do we keep this simple and relational. I would prefer to not get something that's so complicated that I've got to spend. A lot of these are young; they're not coming in with a lot of money anyway. So I'm thinking, how do I do this as cheaply and as professionally as possible? I don't want to create something that's so complicated that I'm having to spend thousands of dollars, in negotiations with an attorney to get some deal right. And then, or you avoid that and you end up signing some deal with an attorney and you get a label deal and you're locked up to some other deal, or you've committed yourself in writing to some producer to be on this project. So I think that can be complicated, because things will look a lot differently, fast forward 3 years and you've got some momentum going and you've got interest from labels, and the conversations are going to change really fast.
Right. Can you explain briefly? I know that we've kind of got, when it comes to royalty points for producers, there's these two buckets that are hanging people up a little bit. And I'd love to demystify this a little bit here. In the conventional sense, there's revenue that comes in from the masters. So we're not talking about publishing. And if a producer works as a songwriter, co-writing, then they should be participating as a songwriter and getting a piece of the publishing, because that's a different thing. So let's set that aside. But the idea of producer royalty points was conventionally those, 3 points or 4 points, or if they were a really superstar, maybe 5 points. But that was basically what were those points? When we say points, that was a percentage point of what, Mike?
The producer points would be a percentage of revenue that the producers would get. If it was, they would get, if they were getting 4 points on that, they're getting 4%, and it's going to be recoupable against what the revenue that the album generates, right? So right. If
all money that came in from the master, they're going to get 4%. And Brown, this is something that you're familiar with. Like, as a producer, you would get 3, 4, 5 points, and it would be of the money that came in from that record. So like, if they sold CDs to a record store at $10 a CD, the record store sells them for 20 or whatever it was, that $10 that came in, they're going to calculate that out and say 4% of that is going to go to Brown after we've recouped whatever it is that we've agreed on recouping. Right? That's going to be a bonus on top of whatever they paid you up front to produce the record.
Yeah, whatever they in those deals, whatever they pay the producer from a label, you're going to recoup. That's in advance against your royalties.
Right.
So, like you said, after everything recoups, the producer is recouping his or her producer advance. Once the record recoups, then the producer royalty normally would be paid from record one. And from record one, if you're getting, I don't know, if the record's net sales are $10 in the old days, then you get 3% of that. You're getting 30 cents a record. So once you sell enough records to recoup whatever your advance was, $10,000, $20,000, $40,000 advance, then you get paid from that point forward.
Right. Now, Mike, can you explain to us how Sound Exchange is different than that? Sound Exchange is a different pot of money that's actually coming from one particular source of revenue related to masters, right?
Yeah, Sound Exchange is one of those that came on, quite a few years ago, and it's become kind of one of the only royalties that the artist sees on a monthly basis. They pay it out monthly, but Sound Exchange is their digital royalties that,
and it's digital only from one kind of use, right?
From performance uses. So it would be Pandora, Sirius XM, particularly in the Christian space. One of your top earners is going to be EMF, which is K-Love, which is also non. So
for digital on demand. So it's not even Spotify.
Correct.
It's not
non-interactive.
Not on demand. It's digital.
Non-interactive. That's
non-interactive.
Right. It's non-interactive royalties
right.
that are from those digital performances. And you always see when you've got a song that's gone to radio, 6 months, you'll see, oh, there's the peak right there because it's been picked up by digital radio. So it's paying out digital radio royalties.
And why are artists able to get Sound Exchange money instead of that all going to the labels?
Sound Exchange kind of divided that out to where 50% of the royalty goes to the copyright owner, which if you're signed to a label, the label owns that. So the label gets 50% of that already up front, right. And it goes into their bucket. And you'd like to think that, well, the artist gets the other 50%. They don't even get that. They get 45% because they hold an extra 5% for, in Sound Exchange, the artist is the featured performer. Right. And that can get really complicated with Sound Exchange because everything just gets split into pennies, and those pennies get split out, and it depends on how many parties are involved. But say you've got two artists that are involved on a song, that 45%, you've got one featured performer, which is this artist, and this featured performer here, and so now they're splitting that 45%. The remaining 5% is held over for non-featured performers. So if Stephen's playing on a record, he may be able to claim 5% as a featured performer if he's playing or performing in any way on the track. He can withdraw from that pot of money. So Sound Exchange just holds that out.
Right.
And so that's kind of how the money's divided.
Now, how do producers participate in that?
Well, within their producer agreement within a label, that they might have it say, hey, I want $5,000 a track, a 4% producer rate, and I want 25% of Sound Exchange. And as a manager, I'm like, hold up here, everybody's already in my artist's back pocket. And the producer is going to say, well, I mean, I created a masterpiece. I deserve to be compensated fairly for that. And I'm like, well, my artist is the one that's having to go out to radio stations to make sure that they're playing your song, your masterpiece, and they're going out playing shows, leaving their families every night to promote this masterpiece that you've created. And so it's about finding a happy medium. And I think that producers probably were underpaid early on, and now it's come that feels like a lot of producers want to get, maybe more than their fair share, in my opinion, of the Sound Exchange money. So some of the producers have gone is they just kind of created a formula-based business, and now they want to know what my record deal looks like. So if they do that, so now they're going in and as a manager, I don't even have a chance to negotiate a lot of this on the front end because the label and A&R has brokered the deal with the producer, and they've come back, and then I get an email from the label saying this is what it is, and they want 25% Sound Exchange, and I'm trying to negotiate that lower. I mean, everything's negotiable, right? But we're trying to keep things moving, and but part of that rate that they've done is like, well, okay, what's the deal? Okay, we're doing 4%, and okay, well, what's the artist royalty rate? So, for instance, if the artist is getting, has 18 points on a traditional deal, that's pretty decent on a kind of new artist deal. But they would take, okay, the 4% producer royalty divided by the 18 points on the record, and I get a 22% Sound Exchange letter of direction. The letter of direction is basically we would sign a letter of direction which would allow Sound Exchange to remove that 22% from my 45% and pay that producer directly that royalty.
Right. So 22% of the 45%, or half of what they're going to get, roughly a little less than half, is going to go to, and that's one of the things that a lot of people are misunderstanding is the difference between 22% of the whole versus 22% of 45%, or 3% of the whole versus what the ratio of 3 points is to the royalty load, which is where we came up with that idea of it being 10 or 15%. So, and that's one of the things I wanted to kind of demystify a little bit for people here, is help them clarify the idea of the total royalty load and what the producer's points are relative to that. So if you were getting 3 points on a 20-point deal, that might be 15% or something like that. And so it might be fair to say, okay, well then to keep it commensurate, maybe they would be getting 15% of the sound exchange, because we're trying to keep apples to apples. Vince, it looks like you got something to interject here.
Just about sound exchange. There are typically two interests in a recorded product. There is the artist master interest, and so that's owned by the label and or the artist. And then there's the copyright interest that you alluded to, that the songwriter and the publisher get. So typically with publishing, the way publishers make money is through performing rights organizations. So every time a song is played on the radio or streamed, the publisher gets half of the income and the songwriters get the other half of the income. So that's on the publishing side. When it comes to streaming of the master, the United States is one of only like 4 countries in the world that does not give public performance income to the master owner. Right now, the United States pays public performance income to the publishing interest, but not to the master owner. All the other countries in the world typically, except for North
Korea, Syria,
yeah,
Iraq, Russia.
Russia. We don't actually pay the master owner
right.
for the value of the song being played over the air. There is legislation in progress to try to rectify that, but when the internet got set up, Congress was smart enough to say, hey, we can't fix the over-the-air public performance problem, but we can fix the streaming problem. And so with respect to Sound Exchange, it was a government-established organization that now licenses the master usage for public performance of the master. And so, like you said, it's just a portion of that. Otherwise, the master owners make money through
the record labels,
through royalties, through what's the word I'm looking for, John? Help me here.
Like the distributor, the record label would be paying it through whoever they're distributing. Mechanical royalties, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about the publishing, right?
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to.
I want to go to
about Sound Exchange is that yes, now the artist can get money and it's not recoupable, and the producer can get money and it's not recoupable, but it's just a portion of all of the income streams that come from the master.
So I want to go to Leiweke here, and I want to summarize real quickly here, and then I'm going to throw it to you, Stephen, and see how this relates to you, because I think I remember us having a conversation when I was in the car the other day, and this is one of the things that really inspired me to want to do this. But if I hear Mike right and Vince right and Brown right, what we have with Sound Exchange is only a way to monetize the non-interactive streaming. So this is not about Spotify on demand. This is not about Spotify premium, and which is actually the biggest chunk. Like the biggest chunk of revenue that's coming is still not Sound Exchange. It's still what's going to the master owners through either their label or directly to them if they're the independent artist. So we got to make sure that everybody understands 90% or maybe 85%, some big number. The biggest number is going directly to the master owner. Yep. But there's this chunk of 10 or 15% that's paid through Sound Exchange, which is a nonprofit set up by the government to collect the royalty of the master performance. And that's what we're talking about when it comes to producers participating in that in some kind of fair and equitable way directly, so that it's not money that has to go to the artist and then the artist has to pay it. They can sign up with Sound Exchange and get paid directly. Everything I'm saying there is correct. But the question is just what the percentage is that's right. Now, Stephen, you work with a lot of these artists that we're talking about that we don't think could ever possibly administer this kind of thing, which is one of the reasons Sound Exchange was set up this way, so that they don't have to. How have you, over the years, you've produced hundreds of these kinds of artists, and tell me about first the kind of agreements you have in place. What do you do to make sure that when you're working with an artist, you understand these terms that we talked about? And then how are you thus far? Are you having any kind of participation in sound exchange for this stuff, or do you get letters of direction? And are you accounting for the fact that something you produce might become a big hit, or have you, like, how are you managing for this stuff as an indie producer?
So I was supposed to be getting paid all along.
That was the idea.
That's what I did.
That was the idea.
I'm going to start taking some notes from you guys right now.
I'm going to get, because of all the times you've come to class, we're going to let you come for free. And you know.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. I might need to brush up on something. So my philosophy and approach to this is, especially on the indie developmental side, is probably different than a lot of people. And I think it's probably completely different than what student producers, than the approach that they're taking. Most of my agreements with independent artists, I build into that contract. I get what I want to make for that project when I'm making that project. I do not ask for any streaming royalties, and I do not ask for anything as long as they are independent. That's their money. They need to recoup. And there's no way they're ever going to sit down with a calculator and figure out what they owe me. I'm just never going to get paid. So it's better for my heart to not even feel like I'm getting cheated in some way. I get what I need to make on the front end of that record, and I'm always here for them, and I will always love and cheer them on and support them. And hopefully they want to come back and make another record, or hopefully they tell somebody else, hey, Stephen didn't stink too bad. We make a record with him. But
you said as long as they're independent, there's a condition.
As long as they're independent. I do usually build in something in the contract that states if their project gets picked up, or they get some sort of sync fee or license or something like that, I simply ask for the 3% producer royalty to kick in, if and including sound exchange direction and all that stuff, and all the things that are going to happen with that. I usually ask for that immediately, like as soon as the record label picks it up. So because there was no producer advance, there was no advance. So hopefully I can start making that money from sale one. And 9 times out of 10 labels have agreed to that. But that's kind of been my MO. And you guys should probably yell at me that I should be asking for more or doing more, and you're probably right, and you should scold me.
Well, I just wonder if there's a way if there's a spot between those two where, how would it hurt them if you were doing 10% of sound exchange, for instance, because the streams are going to be pretty low. It's not going to end up being much money, but at least all of the wires are plugged in, so that if something takes off, you don't have to go back later and say, hey, remember me? I'm the one that produced that. It's been a couple of years, but now you're at 10 million streams, and I'd like to go back and try to get a letter of direction now, even if they never affiliate with a label. Because we're seeing over and over again, there are artists that don't need a label in order to break through. So maybe does it make sense to, it sounds like everything in your deal is set up so that if they upstream to a label, you've got all the right things, all the right conditions. But maybe do you insert something that just says, I got my fee. I'm not asking for any other points on the master in terms of revenue sharing, but what would be wrong about saying I would like a letter of direction to just participate in the sound exchange at a certain percentage, but just keeping that modest?
Immediately.
Yeah, I should probably do that. I need to work like that into my agreement. Something. Yeah. No,
Mike or Brown, what do you think? What do you think?
I think Stephen and Vince should talk later.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah,
and I think it's fair. Basically, I kind of wanted to back up a little bit to something Mike was talking about. Like now, producers are asking for this huge percentage of sound exchange, et cetera. So in my day, in the good old days, as us old timers call it, when records were physical and they were sold in stores, I would make a percentage of all those records that were all those sales. So it was all about the physical product. But what I didn't realize back then is really what I had a percentage revenue in is the master sound recording. I was really earning money based on this master sound recording. So along comes, digital, digitization of music with iTunes and now with Spotify streaming, etc. Basically, I don't know if you've read the book Who Moved My Cheese, but basically I used to earn money, a royalty on the master sound recording in Target and in Lifeway and in all the retail stores. That's gone. So now the only way for me as a producer to earn money on the master sound recording is to have some kind of revenue share on that master recording. So I feel like in the same way that if I was producer and I got a 4% royalty and the artist had a 20 point deal with the record label, basically they're giving me 20% of the artist's total royalties, right? Am I doing the math correct? So why would that not translate? So I'm pushing back on Mike a little bit. Why would that not translate to sound exchange, to me getting whatever the artist is getting, to me getting 20% of it, because it's sort of apples and apples. Anyway, I feel like there's a lot of other aspects to this that I'd love to get your guys' opinion on. But I do feel like basically that's where the money is. It's the real estate is the master sound recording. And so whatever the ISRC code is on that, and whatever pennies are coming in, as a producer, I maybe it's just old school, but I think it's fair to earn whatever my relative share of that would have been in an old label model. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Mike, what do you think about that?
I think that makes sense, and that's fair. And going back to Stephen, if I'm an aspiring new artist, it's like go work with somebody like Stephen. Go sign up with that, because it's important to make a distinction. If it's an indie deal, it is different than working with a major label, and the funds behind that are incredibly different. And so I think it's fair, whether you're on the producer side or as an artist, to make that distinction, because it's not apples to apples. And Stephen's right. If he's expecting royalties and stuff like that from an indie artist, he's never going to get it. So he's just like, here's my fee. I'd love to make this, recording for you. You own it. You take it. And he's out and he's on to the next project. Otherwise, you get tied up in the weeds with some artists that they don't know how to set up Sound Exchange yet. They haven't set it up. They don't have a business manager. They can't figure this stuff out. And then, Stephen's like, well, I got to help them figure this out so I can get, another couple pennies. It's just not worth his time to do that. But, on the label deal, like what Brown was saying, is like, yeah, I think it's fair. There's a lot that has been taken from you or moved to another bucket. Mm-hmm. And it's a fair way for you to do that. And I think we're still, as an industry, trying to figure out, okay, what's that fair piece of it?
And that's something like I think that Mike, you mentioned, where if that total amount on Sound Exchange is already being cut in half, and then there's 5% coming off the top, and so the artist is left with 45%, and then the producer is taking 20% of that 45%, really what the artist is taking is almost 50%. And so that's why you might need to make an adjustment and say, okay, well then if really what the producer, if it's to be equitable, is wanting 20% of what the artist is getting, then you take that 45% and say, what's 20% of 45%? Well, that's 8%. So then that's where I think we come back to this 10% number. And I feel like that might be cleaner to just say, well, 8 to 10% is more commensurate after the artist has already had to give up all of these other pieces, and that might be a little bit more fair. Another thing I and this is probably just me being obstinate, but I'm not quite ready to let every artist off the hook because they're just incapable of doing business. One of the things that I think, and Leiweke does this, he works with artists and he coaches them on marketing. He coaches them on he wants them to have a sustainable career. I've seen him do this with artists for years. And he knows, for one thing, that's his heart. That's the kind of person he is. But he also knows that if they have success and bring in revenue, they're going to be much more likely to come back and want to keep making records, right?
Yeah.
Partly it's because he's great at what he does and he makes really killer sounding records. But if they don't make money, they're not going to come back and make record 2 or 3 or 15, right? I think that one of the skill sets that smart producers might want to cultivate in this era is an extra step, which, gosh, now everybody knows what day we're doing this.
Tornadoes, everyone.
Our phones are about to go off. For those of you who don't know, we're in Nashville and it's flood day. But things like sitting there for, maybe it's almost like what we do with pre-production. This is like post-production. This is sitting and helping them with sound exchange setup or helping them with admin. What if we were to just sum up and say, okay, you've spent $2,500 on production, and you know what? It's going to take you at least $2,500 in marketing to get this thing out there. So let's just call your investment in this $5,000. And we know that it's going to take 1 million spins for you to gross $5,000, right? Just on Spotify. So let's just say, I don't want to hear from you on this song unless you spin it 1 million times, right? And we could work a real simple bit of kind of generalized math to say, maybe we don't have to talk again, but if you get to 1 million spins, then we're going to look and say, oh, let's talk now. This song's doing something. And then it kicks into something where just on an annual basis, we start to talk about points. Yes, bro.
Well, then you're still relegated to having to chase down the artist and go, hey, your song is now streamed 1 million spins. I think it would, I do think that there's merit in that idea, but I wonder if a simpler kind of approach to it, even than that, would be just when they launch their record on DistroKid or TuneCore or one of those digital distribution platforms, they can allocate a certain percentage to the producer. So why not just set that up and set it and forget it? It probably is not going to be, sound exchange is probably not going to be a huge factor, but to get, to start earning pennies, and if something goes viral, you're going to have a percentage of how that particular master is being monetized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you certainly could. I think that it would be, I suppose if somebody was to say, okay, in DistroKid or in some distribution deal, you're going to give 3%. Most of those platforms are set up more for like larger chunks to go to somebody, but you could potentially put in 3 points to.
Yeah, you can do whatever percentage you want to. It can be 3, 5, 18, whatever.
I guess the bigger point I was making was I think producers who can help their artists understand and actually even help them do some of these administrative things are providing the kind of expertise and service that they might come back not only for the great production stuff, but the development stuff. And that helps them think, like when a sync comes in and they're like, I need some advice. Maybe the producers can actually help them with advice on that, or even have some paperwork handy, or know a Vince Wilcox or another attorney. Like producers can become a resource for not just making great songs, but for more expertise. And now that AI is creating so many, things that some people are going to be tempted to go to AI for quote unquote production, producers might be smart to do some of what Leiweke's doing when it comes to artist development and becoming a coach and a friend and a mentor. And maybe some of this admin kind of stuff is something that producers could add to their bag of tricks that would help. And then you just go, I don't mind paying him 3 points or 4 points for considering the value that he's bringing to my career. Like, why would they care about that? I don't think.
One thought as a producer working with indie artists, you're going to have a pretty good idea of like, oh, I think this artist has something. There's something special here. I mean, you have a pretty good indicator on like, man, these songs are at a different level and something's happening. And it to be something that's a real relationship and someone that's a real partner with the artist, if you're serious about developing young talent and guiding in the right direction. So there's a lot of ways to do that, to say, I want to be in business with this person, and to create fair deals so the artist can get out there and make something happen on their own with socials and streaming and stuff that's happening. And at some point come back to the artist and say, hey, I think we got something here. Why don't you let me set up some meetings for you with some of my label partner friends that I think could help take this a lot further. Right. And so I think there's a lot of merit to that. I mean, we're in the relationship business. That's right. What we are. So if you're in it for the money, it's like, just be a slimy producer, get as much money as you can, and move on to the next sucker. But I don't think that any of us here on that call, take that approach. It's like, we love music, we love artists, we want to support them and push them forward. And there could be certain deals where, you're doing a lot of indie stuff, but you've got relationships at the label, and it could be something where you've got a couple of labels that was like, hey, can I bring you something? And maybe there's a backdoor deal as a producer that you can now create with the record company that may or may not affect that artist, but it's not coming out of their pocket, particularly on the front end as an independent artist. We're not trying to take advantage of these people. We're trying to help move them forward. Yeah. And if that happens and you create a great label partner and create a pipeline, man, the sky's the limit. You've now created something that is going to pay you significantly more on the back end.
That's really good. I totally agree with what you guys are saying. And I know, and John feels this way too, our student artists at the university in the commercial music program, we're trying to teach them how to get set up for business. So they take an entrepreneurship class, they develop a strategy, a marketing plan, and we want them, like every artist, we want them to sign up with a PRO, to have an IPI. And if they don't have a publisher or an admin deal, to sign up with MLC. Basically get some of these pieces, these administrative pieces in place, so that if there is money coming in, they can get their share of the funnel. So right. I love the development idea, and I love what Stephen does with his artists, because John's been talking about that for a long time, how he really tries to help them, be set up for success. And that's a huge part of what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, guys, thank you very much, and welcome back, Vince. I was hoping that the floods hadn't taken you away. This has been really helpful. I feel like what I'm hearing us say here, and maybe Vince will kind of throw it to you to kind of wrap this up, but agreements are important, even a verbal agreement up front. Some of the biggest problems I've seen are people that just started doing stuff without really even knowing that there were certain things they should have talked about, let alone gotten in writing. And knowing when something needs to go from verbal to written, even if it's an email. It's something it doesn't have to be a long form contract with lots of legalese that nobody understands, but something that's very simple that says who's entering into an agreement. So who is the producer? Who's actually paying for this? And there's some situations where the artist isn't actually paying the bill. Dad paid the bill, or Uncle Fred paid the bill. Does that mean Uncle Fred owns the masters? It's like, and so it's good sometimes to specify that. And then, the specifying the agreement, once this is paid, so-and-so owns these masters, not the producer, but the person that paid for them. But there's also some obligations the producer might be willing to commit to in terms of the type of assets they're going to deliver, the type of mixes and stems and whatever it is that they need. They're going to commit to delivering certain things in a certain industry standard and that kind of stuff. And then there's a fee, and then there's the royalties, and there's some room. I didn't figure we were going to nail everything down particularly, but there's at least some range of options that should be articulated in that thing up front. The biggest thing is the spirit of it, and no agreement is going to be helpful if people don't understand it, or if they're entered into it without the right spirit. So Vince, I know you're retiring, and Brown, you got something?
Yeah, before Vince much more articulately, wraps this up. I did want to say, I think, like in a real general sense, what we're talking about is communication between an artist and producer, and what we're talking about is the alignment of expectations. So the artist may be expecting a certain thing, the producer is expecting a certain thing, a student manager. I had a band come in to meet with me, and it was the aspiring manager and the aspiring band that was recording. And I said, so to the band, you got to talk about like the ownership of the band, or the players part of the band, who owns the band. And the student manager said, oh, I own the band, which is hilarious. Same with we've had producers thinking that they own the master just because they produce the records. So I think it's all about communication, aligning expectations. And I think what we're really interested in, like your guys' input in helping us with students, is how do we develop even more than just the fine points of a deal and royalties and all that stuff? How do we define and lay out a protocol for a process on and to educate them on how to talk about the creative process, where the assets are, who owns what, who's responsible for what, and just really defining both the expectations financially, but also responsibility. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out.
I think that's what we want to land on. We want to land on something that's relational, something that's a win-win. I have seen, as I'm sure you have seen along the way, many very aggressive producers wanting to basically own everything that the artists master, the artist publishing. They want points on, if the artist gets a deal with a label, they want guaranteed. That's unrealistic, and it's in some cases it's a little bit predatory. And artists get very excited when they find people who are very excited about them, and they kind of miss the idea that
We're waiting.
I think what he's saying is run, people. Run from those people.
Amen.
It's a business.
By the way,
Brown and I,
we might have lost him
Vincent,
again, but just so you guys know, the Riverside, one of the cool things about this is that it actually probably captured whatever he's saying, and it syncs it all
only
up afterwards.
10 to 15% of the records made even recouped. So 85 to 90%.
So we'll all watch the video later to figure out what Vince was.
That's one thing I've coached people on. Just keep smiling and nodding, and it's probably working.
He's dropping the meaning of life on us, and we're missing it right now.
Wow.
So we're in trouble.
Yeah. And everybody, thank you so much for this. It was great. And we're going to take the next steps, and we might try to talk to an artist as well. And we're going to turn this into hopefully a little gauntlet for the students to go through. And but really appreciate you taking time for this. It's an investment. We know it.
Yeah.
And but we really appreciate it. We know the students do.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks for letting me help out, guys. Yeah.
Oh, and then hold on, and I'm gonna hit the stop button, but if you can wait